There are people you can be around for hours and feel fine. And then there are people who leave you feeling drained, heavy, and strangely empty, even if nothing bad happened. According to Carl Jung, this exhaustion is not random, and it is not weakness. It is psychological. Emotional exhaustion around certain people often means you are unconsciously carrying something that does not belong to you. Jung believed that much of human interaction happens below the surface of awareness. Words are exchanged, but something deeper is transmitted. Unspoken emotions, unresolved conflicts, denied fears. Some people externalize their inner chaos. They do not process their emotions internally. They do not reflect. They do not integrate. Instead, their psyche looks for another container, and unconsciously they find you. This is how emotional exhaustion begins. You may not notice it immediately. At first, you feel empathy, understanding, compassion. You listen. You reassure. You absorb tension to keep things smooth. But over time, something changes. You start feeling tired before seeing them. Your body tightens in their presence. Your mind becomes foggy afterward. These are not imagination. They are signals. Jung taught that the body often recognizes psychological imbalance long before the mind does. When you feel exhausted around someone consistently, it usually means a boundary is being crossed at an unconscious level, not necessarily through cruelty or intention, but through projection. Projection occurs when a person disowns part of themselves, fear, anger, insecurity, helplessness, and places it onto another person without realizing it. The other person feels it. And if you are sensitive, intuitive, or empathic, you feel intensely. You may leave the interaction feeling responsible for their emotions, confused about why you feel burdened, guilty for wanting distance. But the exhaustion is not coming from caring. It is coming from carrying. Jung warned that people who do not confront their own inner world often rely on others to regulate it for them. They may appear vulnerable, wounded, or emotionally expressive, but expression without integration is still avoidance. And avoidance is weight. That weight falls on whoever is willing to hold it. Over time, this dynamic creates quiet resentment, not because you lack compassion, but because your psyche knows something is wrong. You were never meant to be someone else's emotional container. Yet, many people learn this role early in life. If you grew up in an environment where you had to be emotionally aware, emotionally responsible, or emotionally calming, your nervous system learned to scan for others' needs automatically. You became skilled at maintaining emotional balance externally, often at the expense of your own. Jung believed that these early adaptations, while necessary at the time, become destructive if never questioned. The child's survival strategy becomes the adult's exhaustion, and this is why certain people drain you more than others. They unconsciously recognize your availability. They feel relief in your presence. But relief for them often means depletion for you. This does not make them evil. It makes them unconscious. And unconscious dynamics persist until they are made visible. The first step is recognizing the pattern. You are not too sensitive. You are not weak. You are not imagining it. Your psyche is responding accurately to an imbalance. The exhaustion is a message. And if you listen to it, everything begins to change. One of the most confusing aspects of emotional exhaustion is the guilt that follows it. You don't just feel tired. You feel wrong for feeling tired. You ask yourself why being around this person costs you so much. You tell yourself they didn't do anything bad, that they are struggling, that they need understanding. And because you can understand them, you assume the responsibility is yours. This is where the trap tightens. Jung explained that guilt often appears when an unconscious role is being threatened. When you consider pulling back, setting a boundary, or creating distance, guilt rises to keep the old pattern intact. Guilt says, if you don't carry this, who will? If you step back, you are selfish. If you stop listening, you are abandoning them. But this guilt is not moral. It is psychological conditioning. Many people who feel emotionally exhausted learned early that their value came from emotional availability. They were praised for being mature, understanding, calming, or selfless. Over time, these traits became fused with identity. I am the one who holds things together. I am the one people rely on. I am the one who understands. The The problem is that identity built on emotional labor has no natural limit. Jung warned that when a person identifies too strongly with a role, they lose contact with the self. The role begins to live them, rather than the other way around. This is exactly what happens in draining relationships. You do not choose to give endlessly. You feel compelled to, and compulsion is always a sign of the unconscious at work. The people who exhaust you most are often those who unconsciously refuse self-responsibility. They talk about their emotions constantly but do not reflect on them. They express pain but do not transform it. They repeat the same stories without insight or change. Expression without integration becomes extraction. Each conversation feels heavy because nothing moves forward, nothing resolves, nothing shifts. You are not connecting. You are absorbing. And because you are sensitive, your psyche registers this imbalance immediately. But instead of honoring the signal, you override it. You stay longer than you should. You listen more than you have capacity for. You suppress irritation to preserve harmony. This suppression has consequences. Jung believed that whatever is not expressed consciously is expressed unconsciously. The irritation you deny turns into fatigue. The anger you repress turns into numbness. The boundaries you don't set turn into exhaustion. Your body begins to protest. Tightness, headaches, a sudden need to withdraw, an unexplained heaviness after certain interactions. These are not random symptoms. They are messages. The psyche is telling you that an invisible line is being crossed. But guilt keeps you from responding. Guilt convinces you that compassion means endurance, that kindness means unlimited access, that being a good person means being available no matter the cost. Jung rejected this idea completely. He believed that true compassion requires consciousness, and consciousness requires limits. Without limits, empathy becomes self-erasure, and self-erasure breeds resentment. You may notice that after repeated exhaustion, your feelings toward the person begin to change. You become irritable, detached, cold. You feel ashamed of this shift, but you cannot reverse it. This is not failure. It is the psyche correcting an imbalance. The unconscious is withdrawing energy because the conscious mind refused to. This is why emotional exhaustion often arrives suddenly, even after years of tolerance. It feels like a switch flipping. One day you can no longer listen. You no longer care to explain. You no longer feel moved to engage. People around you are shocked, but your psyche is not. It has been preparing this withdrawal for a long time. Jung believed that healthy relationships are reciprocal at an emotional level, not perfectly equal, but mutually regulating. Both people process their inner world. Both take responsibility for their emotions. Both can tolerate discomfort without outsourcing it. When this reciprocity is absent, exhaustion is inevitable. The turning point comes when you stop arguing with the exhaustion, when you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is this protecting me from?" This question opens a door, because exhaustion is not punishment. It is protection. And once you understand that, the entire dynamic begins to shift. When emotional exhaustion is finally acknowledged, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You start to create distance. Not always physically. Sometimes emotionally. Sometimes energetically. Sometimes simply by no longer engaging in the same way. This distance often feels wrong at first. You may worry that you are becoming selfish, that you are abandoning someone who needs you, that you are failing to live up to who you thought you were. But according to Carl Jung, distance is not always separation. Sometimes it is differentiation. Differentiation is the process of recognizing where you end and another person begins. It is not rejection. It is clarity. For a long time, you may have lived without this clarity. Other people's emotions bled into yours. Their anxiety became your tension. Their sadness became your heaviness. Their chaos became your fatigue. Distance interrupts this merging. And when merging stops, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel like yourself again. Your thoughts become clearer. Your body relaxes. Your intuition sharpens. This relief is often immediate and deeply revealing. It shows you how much you are carrying. But distance also exposes something else. You begin to notice how much of the relationship was built on your emotional availability, how often you were the stabilizing force, how rarely the other person met you with the same awareness or responsibility. This realization can be painful because it challenges the story you told yourself that the relationship was mutual, balanced, or healthy. Jung believed that insight often arrives with grief. Not grief for the other person necessarily, but grief for time, energy, and identity invested in a dynamic that was unsustainable. You may grieve the version of yourself who thought endurance was love. But grief is not regression. It is integration. As distance continues, guilt often resurfaces, sometimes more strongly than before. The unconscious resists change. Old roles fight to survive. You may hear internal voices saying, "You're being cold. You're overreacting. They didn't mean it." But notice something important. The exhaustion lessens as the distance holds. This is evidence. Your psyche is stabilizing because it is no longer overextended. Jung taught that the psyche self-regulates when given the chance. Boundaries are not barriers to connection. They are conditions for it. Without boundaries, connection turns into consumption. With boundaries, something else becomes possible. Choice. You are no longer compelled to engage. You are no longer driven by guilt. You are no longer reacting automatically. You choose when and how to show up. This choice restores inner authority. Inner authority is the ability to trust your own signals over external pressure. It means you listen when your body tightens. You honor when your energy drops. You act when something feels wrong, even if you cannot fully explain it. This is not impulsive. It is intuitive. Jung believed intuition is a legitimate form of knowing, especially in relational dynamics. The psyche perceives patterns long before the intellect catches up. When you stop overriding intuition in the name of politeness or loyalty, exhaustion gives way to discernment. You begin to see clearly which relationships nourish you and which deplete you. And with this clarity comes a difficult truth. Some people will not adjust. They will push against your boundaries. They will test your distance. They will accuse you of changing, not because you are wrong, but because the old dynamic no longer serves them. This is where emotional maturity is required. You must tolerate being misunderstood. Jung emphasized that growth often involves disappointing others, not out of malice, but out of necessity. You cannot remain whole and meet every expectation placed upon you. Those who benefit from your exhaustion will resist your restoration, but those who are capable of self-responsibility will adapt. They will meet you differently. They will respect your limits. They will engage more consciously. These relationships deepen. Others fade. This is not loss. It is reorganization. As this process unfolds, emotional exhaustion transforms into something else. Calm, not numbness, not indifference, but a grounded calm that comes from no longer being pulled in all directions. You feel more present, more selective, more aligned. You are no longer living at the mercy of other people's inner states. You are living from your own center. This is the beginning of freedom. And once you experience this freedom, it becomes impossible to ignore what you once tolerated. The exhaustion taught you something essential. You were never meant to carry what others refuse to face. And now, you no longer do. There is a moment when emotional exhaustion stops being a warning and becomes a turning point. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you finally understand what the exhaustion was trying to teach you. According to Carl Jung, the psyche does not create symptoms without purpose. Emotional exhaustion is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the soul's way of reclaiming balance when the conscious mind has ignored its limits for too long. Once you stop fighting the exhaustion, everything begins to reorganize. You no longer rush to explain yourself. You no longer feel compelled to justify distance. You no longer argue with your intuition. You simply listen. And this listening changes how you move through the world. You become more selective, not out of fear, but out of respect for your inner life. You notice that when you honor your limits, your energy returns, your thoughts settle, your body relaxes. Peace, you realize, was never missing. It was being overridden. Jung believed that true psychological health emerges when the ego learns to serve the self rather than dominate it. The self speaks quietly, through intuition, fatigue, discomfort, and clarity. Emotional exhaustion was a self asking for authority. Now, that authority has been restored. You no longer feel responsible for managing other people's emotions. You no longer absorb chaos to keep the peace. You no longer confuse compassion with endurance. This does not make you colder. It makes you clearer. You still care. You still empathize. But you no longer disappear in the process. Relationships begin to feel different now. Conversations are lighter. Interactions are shorter, but more genuine. You leave encounters feeling intact rather than depleted. Some people drift away. Others meet you anew. And for the first time, you allow this sorting to happen without interference. Jung taught that individuation requires allowing life to reorganize itself around truth rather than habit. This reorganization can feel unsettling, but it is necessary. You are no longer living reactively. You are no longer available by default. You are choosing presence instead of depletion. And perhaps the most important change of all is this. You trust yourself. You trust when something feels wrong. You trust when you need space. You trust that distance can be an act of self-respect rather than rejection. This trust stabilizes you. Emotional exhaustion no longer controls you because it no longer needs to. You heard the message. You responded. And once that happens, the psyche softens. You move through life with more calm, more discernment, and less urgency. You no longer fear disappointing others because you are no longer betraying yourself. This is what changes everything. Not the removal of difficult people, not the perfection of boundaries, but the shift in inner authority. You are no longer governed by guilt. You are no longer ruled by compulsion. You are no longer defined by how much you can carry. You are defined by how well you remain aligned. Emotional exhaustion was never the enemy. It was a signal that you were ready to live differently. And now you do. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care of what is truly yours.